When you think of a fighting game, one of the first things that comes to mind is its final boss, that larger-than-life challenge waiting at the end. While final bosses are a staple across all of gaming, fighting games have a unique flair for making them especially iconic. But there's another type of enemy that often goes overlooked, the sub-boss, that penultimate fight that tests your skill just before the main event. In most games, sub-bosses are quite forgettable, but in Mortal Kombat, they're often just as notorious, if not even more so, than the final boss itself. Hello my fellow oddities, and welcome to Mortal Kombat Sub-Bosses Explained and Ranked. For each character, I'll break down how often they've filled this role, explore their lore, evaluate their difficulty, and share my personal thoughts on them as sub-bosses. Also, I will not be covering Mortal Kombat Armageddon in today's video because several characters can be a sub-boss in that game, all of which I will either talk about today or already talked about in my video covering all of the final bosses, which you can check out in the top right hand corner. With that out of the way, strap in, because we're diving headfirst into the intimidating, but also often infuriatingly cheap, world of Mortal Kombat sub-bosses. In the last place slot, number 8, I have Tremor, from the nearly unanimously agreed upon worst Mortal Kombat game, Mortal Kombat Special Forces. I say nearly unanimously because me, am a rare Mortal Kombat Special Forces defender. And there goes my whole audience. It's what I get for being real. In Special Forces story, Kano breaks out his 4 most reliable Black Dragon mercenaries from a maximum security prison. One of these mercenaries, the earthbending ninja, Tremor. You then play as Jax, going after and capturing each Black Dragon member before chasing Kano to Outworld, and Tremor is the final one you fight among the henchmen, as he guards the portal to Outworld. In this game, Tremor does not have the intricate abilities you see from him in Mortal Kombat X and 1. He has a projectile where he throws several fireballs and a ground and pound attack, but that is all he does in this game. And when not using exploits, this alone can be tough to deal with. However, this is Mortal Kombat Special Forces. Game exploits are everything. It is incredibly easy to stun lock Tremor into loops of several attacks, particularly from melee range, making this sub-boss battle the least challenging on this list. As a character, Tremor has improved immensely since this title, especially in terms of moveset and design. As a sub-boss for this game, he's not terrible and he's certainly the most intimidating out of Kano's gang. But with this game's lackluster story, he isn't given the time and build-up needed to feel like the threat a sub-boss should. If they didn't have that time, then I feel like they should have gone with an already established character, such as Cabal, to fill this role instead. Moving on to the number 7 spot, I have Noob Smoke from Mortal Kombat Deception. This one pains me as a Bi-Han superfan, and to get the positives out of the way first, Noob Saibot is at his very peak in this game. Most of you should know the story by now. Bi-Han was formerly Sub-Zero and saved Earthrealm, albeit temporarily, from the likes of Shinnok and Quan Chi. However, along the way, he killed Hanzo Asashi, who would go on to be resurrected as Scorpion. Bi-Han would be invited to the Outworld vs Earthrealm tournament with the secret mission to assassinate Shang Tsung. However, this mission would not go to plan, as Scorpion would take his revenge, killing Bi-Han. But as with his rival, Bi-Han would also get resurrected as the Wraith with Shadow Powers, Noob Saibot. Throughout the next few games, Noob Saibot would watch from afar, and work for the likes of Shao Kahn and Shinnok before branching out to complete his own goals. First, he would track down the deactivated Smoke in Shao Kahn's abandoned fortress and reprogram the cyborg to do his bidding. His goal was to use Smoke's technology to produce an army of cyborg demons. However, while leaving Shao Kahn's fortress to the Netherrealm, Noob would be tracked down by his brother Kuai Liang, as well as a former ally, Serena. Noob would overpower his brother and nearly finish the job, but Serena stops him and he flees into the Netherrealm. In-game, Noob Smoke, as the name suggests, was 2 characters in one. They both had 1 fighting stance each, with no weapons and a singular health bar. However, this did not stop them from being one of the highest tiered characters. This definitely made them a challenge in the arcade ladder as the sub-boss of the game. However, not an insurmountable one, as they are still a playable pair on the game's roster that need to be balanced, unlike some other characters on this list who can be much more powerful. Now, what is the problem with Noob Smoke? Well, them being a sub-boss doesn't really make sense. They're not especially prominent in the game's story, nor do they work for the final boss, Onaga. It feels like the only reason they were chosen is that they didn't have another option, so they went with the intimidating, unique 2-in-1 character to substitute for an actually well set up sub-boss. I actually think Dark Raiden could have really fit this position much better, since we do know he has a conflict with the canonical victor of Deception's story, Shujinko. On to number 6, I have Moloch from Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Moloch is a native demon of the Netherrealm. After Quan Chi is attacked by the enraged Scorpion, he sends Moloch and his best friend, Draman, to protect him. However, Quan Chi would flee the realm without them. The two would attempt to track down Quan Chi for abandoning them, but would instead have encounters with Cyrax, where they were forced to run away, as well as Li Mei in an outworld forest. They were then found and held in the basement of Shang Tsung, who had now allied himself with Quan Chi, but kept Moloch and Draman as a safety precaution in case of Quan Chi betraying him. Eventually, the two would be set free and once again encounter the Spectre Scorpion, and hurl him into a raging Solnado before escaping Shang Tsung's palace. As for his gameplay, Moloch is a big, tanky brute more akin to the typical Mortal Kombat sub-boss than the characters we've covered thus far today. He uses his huge chained ball to clobber the player with wide swinging hits, and has this move where he sucks the opponent in, making it quite difficult to play keep away with him. Moloch has a couple unblockable moves, but nothing that truly feels cheap, and in my opinion, he is quite an easy boss fight. Contrary to what you might think, trying to move around and stay away from Moloch isn't the best way to win. It's actually to bring the fight to him with combos. His attacks are super slow and predictable, and once you get that timing and pattern down, you can kinda just beat him up since he can't maneuver around quickly like the regular Deadly Alliance fighters can. Now, I have a sweet spot for Moloch and Draman, but I have to set my bias aside here. Moloch is not the unique or intimidating sub-boss he should be. Firstly, his design is the most generic monster look out of all the non-human characters in Mortal Kombat. Secondly, like Noob Smoke, he just doesn't have that presence or build-up in the story that makes him effective as the second to last, or technically in this game, third to last fighter you battle on the arcade ladder. Moving on to number 5, we have the sub-bosses, plural, from Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. This being the Lord of Apocalypse, Darkseid, and the one we are much more familiar with, Outworld's Emperor, Shao Kahn. After Mortal Kombat 2, Shao Kahn is sent through a portal by Raiden, and at that exact same time, Darkseid is sent through a boom tube by Superman. This results in the two universes merging, and Shao Kahn and Darkseid becoming one, in the form of Dark Kahn. Dark Kahn uses the combat rage to force the Mortal Kombat and DC characters against each other in a massive battle. But when Raiden and Superman come to their senses, they manage to defeat Dark Kahn, resulting in them being separated, with Darkseid trapped in the Netherrealm and Shao Kahn cast to the Phantom Zone. So, naturally, with Dark Kahn as the final boss, you will get either Shao Kahn or Darkseid as your sub-boss. Starting with Shao Kahn, he is pretty much a nerfed version of his Mortal Kombat 9 form. There are a couple new moves in there, like a projectile shield, but for the most part, you'll be dealing with the same shadow charges and hammer swings that make him such a pain in MK9. However, here, there's a major difference: the lack of armor. In MK9, nearly every Shao Kahn attack has armor on it, making them incredibly difficult to counter effectively. But in MK vs. DC, that is just not the case, making Shao Kahn just a regular opponent but with higher damage and increased AI. As for Darkseid, he's much tougher than Shao in my opinion. He doesn't really do much that utilizes the character's vast set of abilities, only stomping and using his Omega Beams. But his stomping moves can get very annoying, considering jumping in MK vs. DC is a bit more of a hassle compared to the other games. Other than that though, he's the same deal as Shao, no armor or anything that makes him particularly special or challenging. Overall, these two as sub-bosses do work within the context of the story. Sort of. But the problem is that it just doesn't feel right. the biggest threat in MK and the biggest threat in DC being sub-bosses just feels like a downgrade. I get it's to set up Kahn as a bigger threat than both of them. I mean, he literally is both of them. But considering that, ironically, despite being a combination of both, Kahn is nowhere near as intimidating or memorable as these two on their own. It just doesn't feel right to me. At number 4, I have one half of the Deadly Alliance, the Sorcerer of the Netherrealm, Quan Chi. Quan Chi was the sub-boss of one game, that being Mortal Kombat Mythology's Sub-Zero. Quan Chi was a sorcerer residing in the Netherrealm, where the fallen elder god Shinnok had been cast to as punishment for attempting to take over Earthrealm. Quan Chi would ally with Shinnok as his second in command, of course with secret intentions of betraying him. They devised a plan to retrieve Shinnok's amulet, a powerful talisman capable of imprisonment and death, which was stolen and locked away in the Temple of Elements. They would have the legendary assassin Sub-Zero take the amulet for them by infiltrating the temple. However, Sub-Zero is then sent by Raiden to take back the amulet in the Netherrealm. After getting through Quan Chi's Sisterhood of Shadow, Sub-Zero would get to the sorcerer himself and they would battle. Mortal Kombat Mythology's Sub-Zero is known for being infuriatingly difficult, with both its level design and boss fights. However, I would not consider Quan Chi one of these insanely hair-pullingly hard bosses. It will take you a few tries, yes, since when he does get close and actually attacks, he is quite damaging and hard to defend against. But for some reason, Quan Chi will constantly just stand there and do nothing, almost as if he's suddenly reminiscing on some traumatic event from his past. This makes the boss fight pretty easy to cheese if you keep your distance, which at this point in the game, you should know how to do. Respect to all those who get to this point in the game, your sacrifice will not be in vain. And you don't even have to damage him all the way if you play through the game correctly, since if you spare Serena when you fight her, she'll come and defeat him for you once his health gets low. And as for Quan Chi as a sub-boss, I think he's pretty great, and should have also been the sub-boss of MK4. He's the apprentice of the big evil final boss, and he's set up very effectively throughout cutscenes, played perfectly by Richard DeVizio. Now getting on to the top 3, the best, most iconic sub-bosses in Mortal Kombat history. At number 3, I have Kintaro, who was a sub-boss in Mortal Kombat 2 and 9. Kintaro is part of the four-armed dragon race of Shao Kahn in Outworld. He was born with a deviant gene that gave him a feline-like appearance, most akin to tigers in our real world. After Goro's supposed death following the first tournament in 1992, Kintaro was sent in by the Shao Kahn as a replacement in the second tournament held in Outworld, and he would be the sub-ultimate challenge before Shao Kahn. Fun fact, the iconic but also infamously miserable Shao Kahn Stomp attack actually originated with Kintaro in this game, not Goro in the original Mortal Kombat, and it's just as awful as you'd think. Kintaro shares a very similar moveset with Goro from the first game, with a fireball, stomps, and grabs, and he can easily deplete your health bar in just a few solid hits, or just grab you in the corner and it's pretty much instant death. Your best bet against him is to just jump kick him over and over again, since not a lot of his moves are effective anti-airs, but get caught in one mistake and you're one round down, or worse, dead. Then we get to Mortal Kombat 9's Kintaro. The story is largely the same, although Goro is clearly still alive, so this time Kintaro is just here, chillin' cause why not. As for the boss fight, we're finally talking about MK9's ridiculously cheap boss battles. Kintaro has a pretty similar moveset to MK2, if anything he's actually slower here, but there's one major difference that may not make the fight harder, but certainly more annoying, and that's the armor. Several of Kintaro's moves have armor, including his fireball and breath attacks, his Shao Kahn Stomp, his grab, and more. Oh, and yeah, his X-ray takes out 2/3 of your health, so MK9 Kintaro is an absolute migraine, and not just because he keeps crushing your skull. Or maybe that is it. On to number 2, the runner-up for best Mortal Kombat sub-boss. I have Motaro from Mortal Kombat 3. Motaro's race of the Centaur were enemies of the Shokan, and with Goro and Kintaro's failures in previous games, Shao Kahn had begun preferring the Centaur and helped them in attempting to exterminate the Shokan. In return, Motaro would lead Shao's forces against Earthrealm, even killing Johnny Cage, establishing him as a major threat and potentially the strongest sub-boss yet. And that is certainly reflected in his difficulty. His attacks are probably the highest damaging out of all the sub-bosses I'll cover today, with one punch taking out over a quarter of your health. He's also constantly overwhelming you with explosive, hard to react to attacks, and even from afar, not only does he have his tail laser, which does massive damage, but he is also completely immune to projectiles. It was a hard choice between Kintaro and Motaro at number 2. Since this game, both have been disrespected, but Motaro especially was butchered in Armageddon, wasn't even an NPC in MK9 while also dying in the story, and was relegated to a cameo in Mortal Kombat 1. Regardless of that though, I think Motaro is just the more intimidating force. When people who played MK3 in arcades talk about Motaro, it feels like all of the fear and also frustration comes back to them for just a moment. Very similar to how people talk about Goro. Speaking of which, at number 1, was this really a surprise? I have the OG sub-boss, the most iconic sub-boss in fighting game history, without any real competition, the Prince of the Shokan, former Mortal Kombat champion, Goro. Goro has been sub-boss a record 4 times, 5 if you count Armageddon. After being defeated for the first time by the great Kung Lao, former champion of Mortal Kombat, Shang Tsung, would set out to find a new warrior capable of taking the tournament back for Outworld. He found his candidate, Goro, who brutally took out Kung Lao and became Mortal Kombat champion, defending his title 8 times afterward, and with the 10th tournament, he had the chance to secure Outworld's victory. All he had to do was defeat Liu Kang. Goro in the first Mortal Kombat was famous for being an arguably tougher and more memorable boss fight than the actual final boss, Shang Tsung, and it makes sense considering, lore-wise, Goro is stronger and was the reigning champion. Goro didn't have a lot of moves, a few throws, a basic jumping stomps, a fireball, but these, along with his normals, caused super high damage. In fact, his most iconic move from this game, and the one you'd think would do the most, his grab and smash, does a fraction of the damage most his other attacks do. Goro was an absolute menace in the original Mortal Kombat, but that would not be his final sub-boss appearance, as he would return as the sub-boss in Mortal Kombat 4. Goro doesn't have much in the way of story in MK4, he really only returns as a sub-boss, with him challenging Liu Kang to a rematch after losing the first time around, but of course he is defeated again. In the expansion Mortal Kombat Gold, however, he is explored a bit more, with Kitana convincing him to form a treaty with the Shokan and with Kung Lao, and the Shokan ally with Edenia. But as for his boss fights, Goro is the true final boss of Mortal Kombat 4. Shinnok, get out of here with that normal dude. Goro has most of his toolkit from the first Mortal Kombat, but now finally has the Shokan Stomp move, adopting it from Kintaro. And for the most part, he just ragdolls you around the arena. But now at least you can appreciate the 3D graphics. Goro would return as sub-boss in Mortal Kombat 9, and most of what I said about Kintaro also applies here as well. A lot of the moves are similar in their function. His Shokan Stomp is even more powerful than Kintaro's, he has armor on almost every attack, and of course, you can't forget the 2/3 of your health X-Ray. And Goro's last appearance as sub-boss was in Mortal Kombat X. Again, there's not much story to talk about, Goro doesn't even appear at all in MKX's story mode. And this is also by far the easiest fight you will have with the Shokan. Unlike the 3 previous versions, there was an actual attempt to balance this version of Goro since he was playable. He was also playable in Mortal Kombat Gold, but balance? MK Gold? Really? You can fight this Goro like any ordinary MKX fight, and you should be fine. But that'll do it for Mortal Kombat sub-bosses explained and ranked. Which sub-boss was your favorite and least favorite? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're down there, make sure to check out the links in the description to my Twitch, merch store, and other social media. Also, give this video a like to show your support, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to know when I next upload a new video. And with that being said, that's it for this video, my fellow oddities. I'll see you next time.